Employment Minister Randy Boissonnault is out of cabinet. Boissonnault has been under scrutiny over contradictory statements about his family heritage and allegations about his business dealings.
He knew that the minister had falsely claimed to be Indigenous in order to take money away from real Indigenous people, and yet he stood by him up until yesterday. Why is it that he always stands up for corruption on his own side?
The member for Edmonton Centre has stepped down from cabinet to focus on clearing these allegations.
Why is it that he fired a real Indigenous minister for telling the truth while trying to keep in place a fake Indigenous minister who told falsehoods?
Telling the truth would be MPs continuing to stand up to advocate for their communities. But the Leader of the Opposition has asked them not to be their communities' voices here in Ottawa, but instead be his voice in their communities.
Opposition MPs and some Indigenous leaders had been calling for Boissonnault to go. The CBC's Kate McKenna is here to break down where the Liberals go from here. Kate, we didn't see this one coming today. It's a bit of a bombshell this afternoon. What kind of reaction are we seeing to Boissonnault being out of cabinet?
Well, certainly this is something that the Conservatives and the NDP were calling for, and something that has been percolating now for weeks, putting pressure on Randy Boissonnault and the PMO to see what would happen because of largely media reports that were in the National Post and elsewhere, making claims about what Randy Boissonnault said about his Indigenous heritage and also some of the things that his former business has been doing. Here's some reaction shortly after the news was announced.
There's a lot of information swirling around. I can tell you I've been here a long time. The best way to tackle that is to focus exclusively on it and make sure that that's what you're doing. And it would have been very hard for him to both do his job and to take an opportunity to defend himself personally.
I was very pleased today, and I'm certain Indigenous people right across this country welcome the news of the resignation of one of the most prolific pretendians in the House of Commons, and it's time that we address this issue moving forward. It's true that the Liberals have let people down. They've let Indigenous people down in particular.
True or false? The Prime Minister should have fired that guy a long time ago.
So just to remind kind of people what the allegations were, they were kind of twofold. Perhaps the most pertinent is that it was found in the National Post published first that Randy Boissonnault's former medical supplies company, Global Health Imports did apply for government contracts claiming to be wholly Indigenous owned. Now it's not. Randy Boissonnault has not claimed Indigenous identity, but he has in the past said some things about his family, referencing Cree heritage that when that reporting came to light, reporters started taking a closer look at other things he said about his family's Indigenous roots, referencing a great-grandmother who was Cree. Well, now he says his family is actually, his mother and brother are actually Métis, so that is a bit contradictory. He has apologized for that. But then on the flip side, there was already scrutiny into his former business, and specifically whether or not he was still involved in the running of his business after joining cabinet, which would be illegal. That is continuing to be studied at the Ethics Committee, and no firm evidence has ever been kind of shared when it comes to that. There were some texts that were made public by his former business partner, Stephen Anderson, referencing a Randy. That's where this other Randy talk comes from. Right. But Randy Boissonnault denies that was him. However, yesterday, the Edmonton police confirmed that they are investigating a separate fraud allegation against his former business. And that was just the newest allegation after weeks of allegations. And so the Conservatives and the NDP were both calling for him to resign. And today he has. Okay,
just a question on this resignation, because it sounds like from what Mark Holland said in the statement that came out that he's going out to clear his name and deal with the allegations against him. I mean, is that what we expect is happening here, or is this you're out because this is all too much? I mean, what do we draw from that? It's a bit confusing.
Certainly. And, and in the PMO statement, it did say specifically that Boissonnault will focus on clearing the allegations made against him, but certainly it would be very hard to be the employment minister and the official languages minister while all of this is percolating around you, while most of question period every day is focused on your business dealings. So these were all no doubt factors that had to be taken into consideration. But we did hear from Indigenous people, as well as a regional chief of the AFN, who said there's really no excuse for your business applying as an Indigenous company for federal contracts, even if your excuse is ignorance, which Randy Boissonnault said his business partner was working on his own. So all of those things sort of in play here, but it was certainly reaching a bit of a fever pitch in the House of Commons.
So what does this mean now for the Liberal government? Because you could see why they had to deal with this, right? The police were involved, there's ethical issues being raised, and after like all of these reports of like false Indigenous companies getting money, they couldn't allow something like this, and it was touching on reconciliation, because as you were saying, First Nations and Indigenous leaders saying he's got to go. I mean, how did they, where does this leave them at this point?
Well, in the immediate interim, they've picked Jeanette Petitpas-Taylor from New Brunswick to take over these two files, employment and official languages. We can recall that Petitpas-Taylor already had in the past the official languages file, so she's resuming that in addition to her work as Veterans Affairs Minister. Right. So we know now that this is two ministers in the cabinet who have sort of taken on additional roles. We can think of Anita Anand, who also took on transport when Pablo Rodriguez left the Liberal caucus, I guess a couple months ago now, maybe 1 month ago. So certainly there is talk of a shuffle. We know that the Prime Minister plans to shuffle the cabinet before the next election. It's sort of interesting that he chose, or that they decided together that Randy Boissonnault would leave cabinet now as opposed to just waiting to be shuffled out. Clearly, that indicates that they saw this to be at a level that was untenable. But the other big issue in this is that Randy Boissonnault represented Alberta. There are only two Liberal MPs from Alberta. The other one is George Chahal. And we know, you know from your reporting that he was one of the MPs who quite recently got up in caucus and said the Prime Minister had to go. So who will go on to represent Alberta in the cabinet? That remains to be seen. I mean, they could bring in a senator or something.
I think that's unlikely because they're independent now. They're out of the caucus, and it's tough to bring someone in like that. But look, in trying to solve this problem, they put a spotlight on an old problem in that the caucus issues and the 24 MPs and Chahal, we don't know if he signed the letter, but he definitely spoke in the caucus meeting. He says he's got to go, and right now he's the only other option unless Boissonnault can clear his name. So more to come. All right, Kate McKenna, the CBC's Kate McKenna, good to have you here. Thanks so much. Okay, let's bring in the power panel on this. Emily Nicolas is a columnist for Le Devoir. Amanda Alvaro is a former Liberal Party communications strategist. James Moore is a former Conservative cabinet minister. And Brad Levine is a former NDP national campaign director. It's good to see you all, gang, on what's a pretty busy day. Amanda, I'd like to start with you. We went from Randy Boissonnault in cabinet to the introduction of the other Randy to now no Randy at all in cabinet. What do you make of this move today, stepping aside to clear his name of the allegations, they say?
David, how did I know that you were going to start with me today? You can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen, and the Liberals cannot take the heat on this one. Maybe at a different time, maybe under different circumstances, with different numbers in the polls, they could have withstood this kind of scrutiny and the headlines for a while longer, but this was serving to be a massive distraction. So there was no doubt in my mind that if this continued, as it has been for the last few days, weeks, then we would end up in this place. And I think it was the right call by both the minister and the Prime Minister for that very reason, to take away the distractions so that the minister can focus, or the former minister can now focus on some of the allegations that have been leveled against him, and the government and the party can get back to focusing on the issues that they want to focus on. If they don't do that, then they're in this spiral, which is having to answer all of these questions in question period, having to deal with this in the media. And when so many things are stymied and stalled right now, this becomes really the focus, the narrative, and the headline of the day.
Well, James, I don't know if the Conservatives are going to let it go. And one of the challenges that the Prime Minister has is that if Randy Boissonnault doesn't go back into cabinet, you want Alberta in cabinet. George Chahal is your only other option. And he stood up in that caucus meeting a few weeks ago and said the Prime Minister's got to step down. So what the heck do they do now?
Well, I don't think there are a lot of Albertans that are saying keep Randy Boissonnault around because he represents the best of us for the Cabinet of Canada. So you can scratch that. Look, Randy Boissonnault, at the peak of his Justin Trudeau's powers, won his riding 37% to 34% over the Conservatives. He lost it in 2019. He won his riding in the last election by 1 percentage point, with the People's Party getting 4 percentage points. He was on borrowed time, was going to lose his seat anyway. The fact that he's still a member of Parliament is astonishing to me. And the fact that Justin Trudeau, who's the leader of the Liberal Party, and let's not forget this part of this scandal as well, Justin Trudeau is not just the Prime Minister of the country, he's also the leader of the Liberal Party of Canada. The Liberal Party of Canada fundraised and boasted up on Mount Pius about the diversity of their Indigenous caucus, playing, identity politics and talking about Randy Boissonnault being an Indigenous member of their caucus, and tried to raise money and tried to increase the validation of their ability to deliver on behalf of Indigenous Canadians. And it was all a fraud. It was all a lie. And to the point where Randy Boissonnault apparently and his company may have gotten taxpayers' money by grifting off of this lie in public office. It's shameful. The only thing that seems just about this is that the employment minister is now unemployed, and the former employment minister is probably going to be unemployable in the private sector when he gets there in a few months.
Okay, interesting, and that in 2019, I think the Liberals listed him as an Indigenous candidate, and we reported it on our webpage, and there's a correction saying he's not an Indigenous candidate, and it was Randy Boissonnault who reached out to say the party had it wrong. But he does claim a family connection, said he was adopted in to a family where he says his grandmother had Cree heritage. That has now shifted to Métis heritage. So it is a shifting narrative, James, and the party, you're right, did incorrectly identify him as this. And so, Brad, here we are. So much noise around ethics because of what his company did, about on the issue of reconciliation because of whatever the actual claims were to an Indigenous heritage that evolved over time. Where do you think this leaves the government with all of this?
Yeah, it's in significant trouble. Now, I think that one of the challenges that the Liberals are facing is how long it took for them. Why today? Why now? Why is Boissonnault out of cabinet today? This notion of stepped aside. He was either quit or he was fired. Leave that to the reader, because steps aside doesn't sound very, very conclusive. But when you've got a crisis like what Boissonnault, both on his business side as well as on his claims of heritage side, you have to act quickly. You have to move fast and own that narrative. They did not do that. He was a punching bag for the opposition for weeks. And I think that that's one of the big mistakes. The question many Canadians, I'm sure, are asking themselves is, why today? Why was he fired from cabinet today? And what new information has surfaced, either from Randy himself or in the Prime Minister's office? I agree that this is not going to go away. This will be an issue, and it'll be an issue in the next election campaign. Because when Liberal candidates do make claims as to their heritage, there's going to be a credibility issue that they're going to have to now really step up the proof of the claims that these candidates will make.
Yeah, I mean, the Liberal Party did identify him as Indigenous. Whatever you think of it, they did do it. I think, Emily, I don't know why they didn't act on a cabinet removal for past issues. I think the reason it happened today, as opposed to yesterday, the day before, is the Prime Minister was out of the country, and I don't think you necessarily want to remove someone from your cabinet on foreign soil. That's a suspicion on my part, but it would make sense. I mean, what's your thoughts on how this all unfolded today?
Well, so it unfolded in two ways. Once, as everybody has said already, it was really important that somebody who makes false claims of being Indigenous or has serious allegations against them be removed from cabinet. And so I don't know why it didn't happen before. However, it's really important that we understand that the House of Commons behaved today in a way that sounds very disconnected from the pain that is actually caused in Indigenous communities when you have somebody who falsely claims to be Indigenous. There are two things. There's the political game of aha, caught you, and then there's the emotional impact of seeing a person again having basically saying something that they're not, and the very emotional mess that it creates for a lot of people across the country in terms of who's responsible for for making sure that communities are in charge of identifying themselves essentially and decolonizing the ways in which Indigenous people can self-identify or not. There's also the issue of resources that are, or even awards a lot of the time. This is part of a wave that has been impacting a lot of universities, a lot of people in cultural sectors, a lot of icons. Obviously, everybody's talking about Buffy St. Mary's. And the ways in which the House of Commons can play this game at a ha-ha gotcha mode actually can backfire, because it sounds completely disconnected from the ways in which those realities are lived on the ground. And when it's a partisan game that is disconnected from the actual lived realities of the people who are suffering from this, it will sound a little bit like the ways in which a lot of Conservatives MP have never let go of the blackface Trudeau incidents. It sounds like something that has nothing to do with the care for actual Black people. And so people will have to be very careful in the next weeks and the next months in terms of how they sound. Does it sound like an outrage that is partisan, or does it sound like it's coming from actual care for Indigenous communities?
But you know, Amanda, there is now, there are two ministers doing double duty. Anita Anand is Treasury Board and Transport, both big jobs. There is Jeanette Petitpas-Taylor doing Veterans Affairs and now Employment. And you have four ministers who are not running. So you have 6 jobs, essentially, that you need to sprinkle around or fill on a permanent, full-time, going forward basis, just as the U.S. is about to come under new management. I mean, this is a very difficult situation for a government that is already sort of stretched to its capacity, it would seem. I mean, what do you think the Prime Minister can do at this point to sort of like fix the ship of state here?
Well, I think that, as we get more information about the Trump administration, we may find that the Prime Minister makes some decisions about his own cabinet and how that cabinet shapes up in order to respond to what's happening south of the border. And some of these issues that are happening domestically will also, I'm sure, go into those considerations. So, this is a very precarious time. It's a turbulent time, obviously, but it's a time I'm sure that the leadership within the government is really looking around and saying to themselves, who are going to be the best people positioned not only to deal with a new Trump administration and the fallout from that, but also who are the best people positioned on both the policy and communication side to lead us through what will be a very difficult few months. And so I'm sure that will be a consideration that they're all making at this time.
James, the statement from Randy Boissonnault, the Prime Minister, today kind of suggests that there's a path back into cabinet for Randy Boissonnault. Do you see that as possible, given everything that's happened over the past 2-3 weeks?
No, it's over. It's over for him. It's over for this government. With regard to your first question, though, if you I wouldn't mind taking a run at that about, people wearing double-hatted in the cabinet and because the gap on that. Look, there's a reason why that's happening, and it's not. I mean, Amanda puts a good veneer on it because of the the nature of the Trump administration. But that's all, frankly, a relative smokescreen. There are plenty of capable men and women in the Liberal caucus who could roger up and take those roles, but they're not. And why aren't they? And why aren't they being filled? Well, one could say because they're trying to matchmake with the Trump administration and who might be in the different cabinet portfolios upon, the lame duck session and the installation of those different cabinet secretaries with President Trump. I think a more realistic analysis would say that Justin Trudeau has a caucus rebellion, and the majority of his caucus doesn't want him to be the leader in the next election campaign, and he's holding out the possibility that a bunch of them could become cabinet ministers, and it keeps them at bay in the meantime, and so that Justin Trudeau doesn't have to deal with some rearguard action against his own leadership, because a lot of them hope that they can be in cabinet and have that opportunity to serve in the position. Again, as a former minister, I get that, but that's really what's happening here, right? That's why these people are being double-hatted, and there's rumors of a cabinet shuffle and all that, and that'll probably persist for the next few weeks in order to keep the rebels at bay in the anticipation that they might get tapped to go into cabinet so that Justin Trudeau can escape this fall session of Parliament, go into Christmas, and decide whether or not he's going to run again. It's pretty self-evident that that's what's happening.
Brad, just as a quick final point, but they've got to get all of that sorted. by January 20th, because they need to have their key people in place for the inauguration to align with whatever is happening with Trump, right? Like whatever other political considerations there are, there's still a government in the country to run while your biggest trading partner is going through seismic change. So they need to, they do not move with the crisis footing that their political situation would suggest they should, but they got to get this done by January.
They do, and they're not getting anything accomplished now. Parliament is incredibly, it's locked down. Nothing is progressing. Their agenda, they've lost the plot. There's no agenda here. I would also throw in not only some cabinet minister shuffles, but prorogue, reboot, and use the Trump administration as an excuse for why this government, in its last year of its mandate, needs to retool and refocus.